Welcome in, everyone. Or rather, welcome to you, the listener.
Yeah, welcome.
You're probably sitting there right now with just a million things competing for your attention.
Oh, totally. Emails.
Emails, right? Notifications. Just the general hum of a world that it just won't slow down.
Never slows down.
Exactly. And we know you are constantly looking to connect the dots, to figure out how the undercurrents of culture are actually moving. So we are just so glad you decided to spend your time with us today, because we have an exploration that is, well, it's going to take you down a rabbit hole you probably didn't even know existed.
You really didn't.
We are going to connect some dots that seem completely isolated at first glance. We're talking about the inner workings of social media algorithms.
Right.
The foundations of classic literature and the absolute cutthroat multi-billion-dollar battlefield of the streaming wars.
It's a collision of worlds that really redefines how we think about modern media. The landscape of entertainment is shifting under our feet in real time. I mean, the mechanics of how a story goes from a late-night idea in someone's bedroom to a global billboard-dominating phenomenon,
Right.
They've been completely rewired over the last half-decade. We are looking at an ecosystem that is basically feeding on itself. It's bypassing traditional gatekeepers and creating entirely new rules for what gets made and what gets watched.
Exactly. And our map for this journey today is drawn from some really incredible analysis, specifically this extensive breakdown by the creator Abby Ree.
Yeah, she did a great job with this.
She really did. She recently mapped out how the internet phenomenon known as BookTok is essentially, well, her title says it all. It's eating Hollywood alive. Literally eating it alive. Right. So the mission of this deep dive is to explore how this highly specific corner of the internet is no longer just a digital book club.
No, not at all.
It is evolved into the central nervous system of the television industry. It is fundamentally rewiring how series are greenlit, the place at which they are produced, and the way they're consumed by millions.
The profound shift here is the transfer of power. For a century, we've operated under a model where a handful of executives in Los Angeles decided what stories the public got.
Right, the old gatekeepers.
They were the ultimate gatekeepers. Now we are shifting to a model where a highly engaged, decentralized digital community of readers is essentially forcing the hands of major Hollywood studios.
Yes.
They're dictating the production slates of the biggest streaming platforms on Earth.
It's wild to see the tail wagging the dog like this. And I want to tease the journey ahead for you right now, just to set the hook.
Oh yeah, this gets...
By the end of this conversation, you're going to understand how a narrative originally about the Marvel superheroes, Captain America and Bucky Barnes, grabbing smoothies together,
smoothies,
somehow morphed into HBO Max's biggest new hit. I know that sounds like a total fever dream, but the pipeline is real. The receipts are there, and the implications for everything you watch are massive.
Okay, let's unpack this. We need to start by looking at this transition from bookshelves directly to binge watch.
If we look at the trajectory, the initial wave of the BookTok influence was primarily focused on movies.
Right.
A book would go viral, a studio would buy the rights, and 2 years later you'd get a 2-hour theatrical release or maybe a straight-to-streaming film. But the critical evolution, and this is where the tectonic plates of the industry are really shifting, is that this algorithmic powerhouse has moved past features.
Yeah, it's not just movies.
No. It has completely taken over series adaptation. That is where the serious capital is being deployed right now.
Right, because the economics of a series versus a movie in the streaming era are just completely different. A movie might get someone to log into your app for a weekend.
But a series retains a subscriber for a month, maybe 2 months, if you stagger the release. The retention value is astronomical.
Exactly.
And we are seeing this play out with massive global phenomenons. Look at the recent wave of hits. We've got Heartstopper, which became a cultural juggernaut.
Yes.
We've got The Summer I Turned Pretty.
Yeah.
We've got The Housemaid, which recently dropped. And of course, what's been somewhat humorously referred to as the plague of Colleen Hoover adaptations taking over every screen available.
It's an aggressive takeover of the production pipeline. These aren't just projects that happen to be based on books. These are projects that were actively spearheaded, fast-tracked, and greenlit specifically because of their virality on that app. Becoming a viral sensation on BookTok is no longer just about hitting the New York Times bestseller list and moving physical units at Barnes & Noble. It is an audition for a massive multi-season television adaptation.
But wait, I want to play devil's advocate here for a second. Why are studios so eager to hand the keys over to a social media algorithm?
It's a valid question.
I mean, these are massive corporations with entire departments dedicated to trend forecasting and script development. Why are they suddenly letting a bunch of 20-somethings on their phone dictate a $100 million production slate.
What's fascinating here is the underlying business logic driving this entire shift. It all comes down to the most powerful phrase in corporate Hollywood.
Which is?
Risk mitigation.
Oh, right.
The current economic climate of streaming is brutal. The era of blank checks and endless growth is over. Wall Street is demanding profitability.
Right, they want a return on investment.
Exactly. Creating a new television series from scratch, commissioning an original script, developing unknown characters, hoping the tone resonates. It is an incredibly expensive, terrifying gamble for an exec.
Definitely.
If it flops, that's tens of millions of dollars incinerated and potentially someone's job.
It's basically placing a massive bet on black at the roulette table and just praying.
Exactly. But when a studio looks at a piece of intellectual property that has already gone completely viral organically online, they are looking at a fundamentally different risk profile. When a book gets picked up for an adaptation in this current ecosystem, it isn't just a manuscript an editor liked. It is already a stress-tested, market-validated success within a massive, highly vocal.
So the studios aren't guessing if people will like the story. They have the hard data proving that millions of people are already obsessed.
Precise. Production companies can acquire these rights with a fraction of the usual anxiety. Why? Because they are buying a guaranteed audience.
Right.
Think about the marketing budget for a typical tentpole. You have to spend millions just to convince people to care about the premise, to learn the characters' names, to understand the world.
Yeah, you have to build all that awareness.
But with these viral adaptations, that work is already done. The audience is already there. They aren't just waiting for the show. They are actively, aggressively demanding to see these characters on screen.
They've basically cast the show in their heads already.
Right. They've made fan edits. They've created the hype machine entirely by themselves.
So the studio's job is completely inverted. They no longer have to build a fan base from the ground up. Their job is simply to translate a guaranteed hit from text to screen without messing it up.
Which is still hard, but a different kind of hard.
Right. And by doing that, they're also introducing this already vetted story to a broader audience who maybe isn't scrolling through book recommendations online, which just detonates the popularity even further.
It is an incredibly efficient arbitrage of attention. You take the concentrated, high-intensity engagement of a digital fandom, and you leverage it into broad, mainstream view. The BookTok boom is engineering a type of virality that traditional Hollywood marketing could never manufacture, no matter how much money they threw at billboards or television spots.
I want you, the listener, to pause for a second and think about your own streaming queues right now. Pull up Netflix, Amazon, HBO, whatever you use.
Yeah.
Look at the hit shows you've been watching over the last couple of years. How many of those were actually beta tested on a social media app via a community of rabid readers before a single casting director was ever hired?
A lot of
It is a staggering percentage of modern television. Which brings us perfectly to the centerpiece of our analysis today.
Right.
To truly understand the sheer magnitude of this pipeline, we have to look at a specific case study.
We do.
We need to talk about the absolute phenomenon that is heated rivalry.
Heated rivalry is perhaps the most perfect distillation of every single dynamic we are discussing today. It is a masterclass in modern media consumption.
Yeah.
The series is adapted from the Game Changers books by the author Rachel Reed. It's an expansive 6-book series that was published between 2018 and 2020. And true to the pattern we've just laid out, this book series didn't just sell well, it became an absolute juggernaut online.
To give you the premise, and it's a premise that practically begs for algorithmic engagement. It is a very steamy, very intense 6-part narrative that centers entirely around 2 rival professional hockey players who sustain a secret, highly combustible relationship over the course of a decade.
Right.
That is the core engine of the story. You have the high stakes of professional sports, the intense physical rivalry, and the hidden emotional depth. And because of the massive snowballing momentum it gained online, it was practically inevitable that it would be picked up for its own television.
And this is where the release strategy and the subsequent audience reaction become a fascinating case study in how globalized fandoms clash with regional legacy.
Oh, this part is so interesting.
The series premiered on November 28th, 2025, but it did not get a massive global day-and-date release. It was released strictly on Crave, which is a Canadian entertainment platform owned by Bell Media.
Which, if you think about it purely from an old-school executive perspective, makes a kind of localized sense. It's a show about hockey. Canada loves hockey. Craves is a Canadian streamer looking for premium domestic content.
Exactly, it tracks.
You can even look at the initial marketing push. There were promos where the lead actors, Connor Story, who plays the Russian superstar Ilya Rozanov, and Hudson Williams, who plays the Canadian Golden Boy Shane Hollander, are doing these incredibly localized drops.
Right, the promo.
They're looking at the camera saying, "Hey, what's up, Canada?" And heavily emphasizing that the show is streaming only on Crave.
They treated it like a regional broadcast, but what they vastly underestimated was the borderless reality of the built-in audience.
Totally.
They were operating on a legacy media playbook, completely ignoring the fact that the fandom that willed this adaptation into existence was international.
Yeah.
You had a global audience of die-hard fans who had spent years making the book a viral hit, suddenly waking up to the realization that they had no legal way to watch the very adaptation they had been demanding.
The resulting chaos is honestly hilarious and deeply revealing. The fandom essentially had a collective breakdown.
Oh yeah, absolute panic.
You had thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of fans across the United States, the UK, Europe, everywhere outside of Canada, who were suddenly thrown into an absolute panic. They were frantically signing up for VPN trials, trying to spoof their IP addresses to make it look like they were sitting in a living room in Toronto just so they could access this Canadian streamer.
It's wild.
They were passing around tutorials on Twitter and Discord on how to bypass Crave's geo-blocking because they were that desperate to see Shane and Ilya on screen.
That right there is the golden metric. That level of desperate, technically inventive demand proves the absolute power of this guaranteed audience. They aren't just casually interested viewers who might click on a thumbnail if it pops up on their homepage.
Right.
They are an active, mobilized force that is willing to fight through technological barriers to consume your product. And that kind of noise does not stay quiet for long.
Exactly. The major players in the streaming wars have whole teams dedicated to scraping social media for exactly this kind of data. That panic, those VPN spikes, the sheer volume of international conversation around a regionally locked Canadian show. It triggered a massive acquisition. HBO Max stepped in.
And when a prestige platform like HBO Max acquires a property, the scale changes entirely. But what's truly revealing is the internal perspective of the executives who made these deals.
Yes, let's talk about that quote.
There is a direct quote from Justin Stotman, the VP for content for Bell Media, that perfectly encapsulates the initial blind spot of the legacy media mindset. Speaking about the acquisition and the show's unexpected explosion, he admitted, "I thought it would be a kind of very specific, maybe gay-only show, but it really is a broader audience than that."
That quote is just, it's everything. It is the entire thesis of why traditional Hollywood is struggling to understand the internet.
It truly is. Stotman looked at the surface-level premise, 2 male professional hockey players in a secret romantic relationship, and he ran it through his legacy metrics. Wow. In the old Hollywood model, that premise is categorized as demographics. What he failed to account for, until the data slapped him in the face, was the sheer volume, ferocity, and diversity of the audience that had already validated.
Yeah.
The appeal wasn't niche at all. It was an absolute juggernaut.
He assumed the audience was small because the premise didn't fit the traditional 4-quadrant blockbuster mold. But he completely missed the fact that a good story, fueled by word of mouth, on an algorithm that connects like-minded readers globally, creates its own massive quadrant.
Exactly.
And to his credit, he admits it. He followed up by saying, from a business point of view, the money we spent for acquisition was an incredible investment. He realized they had basically bought a winning lottery ticket where the numbers were already announced.
The metrics of success that followed are undeniable and frankly historic for the platform. In Canada, Heated Rivalry didn't just do well, it became the most watched original series ever on the Crave platform.
Ever. Let that sink in. The most watched original in the platform's history. But the momentum didn't stop at the border. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Once HBO Max integrated it into their global library, the performance was staggering. It became the top-rated, non-animated acquired series on their entire platform.
Wow.
Furthermore, it landed in the top 5 among all scripted debuts on HBO Max for the entire year.
Top 5 on HBO Max. We are talking about the home of Succession, The Last of Us, The White Lotus.
Yeah. Massive shows.
A show that started as a Canadian exclusive based on a romance novel about 2 hockey players went toe-to-toe with the biggest prestige television on the planet. And naturally, because television is a business of momentum, it was immediately renewed for a second season.
This completely validates the production strategy we discussed earlier. HBO Max didn't have to build that audience from scratch. The digital community delivered an international, highly engaged, cross-demographic audience right to their doorstep, resulting in record-breaking metrics. But what happens next is what elevates this from a simple adaptation success story into a truly unique modern phenomenon.
Right, because the pipeline doesn't end when the credits roll on the season finale.
Yeah.
We have to talk about the second life, sir. We've spent a lot of time discussing how the book fuels the television show. But the reality of this new ecosystem is that it's a two-way street.
Yes.
The show also fuels the book. It is a cross-medium, self-feeding virality.
It's an Ouroboros of commercial success. The moment the heated Rivalry series hit television screen, the original books completely vanished.
Gone.
The secondary demand was immediate and overwhelming. In the United States, the physical copies were entirely wiped from the shelves. You couldn't find it in a big box store. You couldn't find it in an independent bookshop. The supply chain was completely drained.
And it wasn't just a localized American phenomenon. The predictive modeling on this is fast. With the show slated to premiere in the UK around the 10th of January, the immediate forecast from industry analysts was a secondary identical sellout in the British market.
Yeah, they saw it coming.
They fully expected the physical inventory of the heated Rivalry books to be completely decimated the moment that...
To really grasp the scale of this reciprocal effect, we can look at the gold standard, the Bridgerton effect. When Netflix dropped the first season of Bridgerton in late 2020, it didn't just become a massive television. It completely upended the publishing industry's understanding of a book.
For those who might not know the backstory, Bridgerton is based on a series of romance by Julia Quinn. But here's the critical piece of content. The first book in that series, The Duke and I, had been initially published 21 years prior to the Netflix adaptation.
21 years?
Yeah.
In traditional publishing, the life cycle of a book is incredibly short. You have your hardcover release, your paperback release a year later, and then the book moves to the backlist.
Right, it just sits there.
Unless you are Stephen King or J.K. Rowling, a 21-year-old romance novel is effectively dormant. It might sell a trickle of copies a year, but the massive global success of the Netflix series acted as an unprecedented catalyst.
Viewers absolutely devoured the show, but a television season is only 8 episodes long. When it ended, that ravenous audience was left with a massive cliffhanger and a desperate need to know what happens to the rest of the family.
They needed more.
They couldn't wait a year and a half for season 2 to be filmed. So what do? They bypassed the wait and went straight to the source material.
And the resulting sales numbers defied every known metric in the publishing world. A 2-decade-old manuscript rocketed straight back to the #1 spot on the New York Times bestseller.
Crazy.
HarperCollins Avon, the publisher, reported that in 2021, just a few months after the release of the first season, that single book had sold an astonishing 750,000 copies.
750,000 physical units.
Moved in a matter of weeks for a book that had been sitting quietly on the backlist.
It's just mind-boggling. It completely shatters our traditional understanding of linear media consumption. The old model was a straight line.
Right.
A book is written, it gets popular, a movie is made, and that's the end of the line. The adaptation was the final destination.
Right.
But now, the book creates the show. The show acts as a massive global advertisement that resurrects the book, which drives hundreds of thousands of new readers to buy the text, who then become hardcore fans demanding more seasons of the show.
It fundamentally changes how IP is valued. A studio isn't just buying the rights to a story, they are buying into an active, breathing ecosystem. And I think the analogy used in the breakdown of this phenomenon is incredibly sharp.
Yeah, love this analogy.
It compares this literary resurgence to the way music is currently consumed on short-form video platforms.
Yes, it's exactly like when an older song gets a second life on an app like TikTok.
Yeah.
You've definitely seen this happen. The most famous example is Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill.
Oh, yeah, massive.
That song came out in 1985. But because it was featured in a highly emotional sequence in Stranger Things, an entirely new generation of listeners discovered it, and it became the #1 song in the world nearly 40 years after it was recorded. Or look at Sophie Ellis-Bextor's Murder on the Dance Floor, surging back onto the charts because of the movie Saltburn.
The product itself didn't change a single note. Kate Bush didn't re-record the song. Julia Quinn didn't rewrite the manuscript.
Right.
But the distribution mechanism, the cultural context, and the algorithmic delivery system provided a massive resurgence. Television and film are currently acting as a giant global recontextualization engine for literature.
It sounds like an absolute utopia for authors and studios, a perpetual motion machine of money and engagement. But of course, whenever a system becomes this lucrative, the opportunists rush in. And that brings us to the inevitable dark side of this ecosystem. We have to talk about the rise of fast fashion literature. Because for every heated Rivalry or Bridgerton that captures the culture, there's a graveyard of absolute failure.
It's a crucial distinction to make. Just because a book has a built-in audience on an app does not guarantee it will translate into a successful, high-quality television. The financial risk might be mitigated for the studio, but the artistic risk remains entirely intact. The core question is, why do some of these adaptations resonate so deeply, while others feel completely unwatchable?
Now, obviously, audiences being disappointed by an adaptation isn't a new concept. Fans have been complaining about movies ruining their favorite books since the invention of cinema. Usually it's because the director changed the ending, or cut a beloved character, But the modern problem, the one driven specifically by this new algorithmic pipeline, is something entirely different. It's what analysts are calling the bug of virality.
The bug of virality is perhaps the most dangerous side effect, because authors, agents, and publishers have all seen the immense, life-changing financial reward of landing a viral hit that translates into a streaming. The very nature of how books are being written is fundamentally altered.
Changing the craft.
It has led to a severe industry-wide lack of detail, care, and time being invested in the actual craft of writing.
The comparison that really crystallized this for me is viewing the current state of certain publishing sectors as fast fashion.
That's a great way to put it.
Think about how fast fashion works in the clothing. And a micro trend pops up online, let's say a specific type of neon crop top. Within days, factories are churning out thousands of cheap, poorly stitched versions of that top to capitalize on the momentary hype.
Right, get it out quick.
The clothing isn't designed to last. It's designed to be worn for a single Instagram photo and then fall apart in the wash. That exact same philosophy is currently infecting literature.
We are seeing an influx of writers who are churning out massive volumes of work at an unsustainable pace. You have authors releasing 4, 5, sometimes 6 full-length novels within a single calendar year.
Which is insane.
The intent is no longer to craft a nuanced narrative, build a believable world, or create a timeless piece of art. The intent is entirely merciless. Write a book specifically engineered to go viral, cater to readers with fractured attention span, and secure that lucrative adaptation.
It's reverse engineering art to appease an algorithm. The goal isn't to tell a great story. The goal is to hit the right SEO keyword. And when you write a book with the sole purpose of going viral, you end up relying on what are called empty tropes.
Tropes inherently are not a bad. They are the foundational building blocks of all genres. Enemies to lovers, the chosen one, fake dating, the one bed.
The class.
These are structural archetypes that have existed for centuries. The online reading community thrives on categorizing books by these tropes. It helps readers find exactly the emotional flavor they are looking for.
Right, but there's a difference between a trope naturally occurring in a well-developed story and a story existing only to deliver a trope.
Exactly. The problem arises when a book is written specifically as a delivery mechanism for a checklist of viral tropes with absolutely no connective tissue, character development, or narrative logic supporting. The author knows the algorithm favors enemies to lovers, so they force two characters to hate each other for no discernible reason, just so they can hit the required beats.
Yeah, just tick in a box.
The resulting narrative feels completely hollow. And when a studio buys that hollow book and tries to stretch it into an 8-hour television series, the lack of substance becomes glaringly obvious. It results in adaptations that feel entirely empty, leaving audiences confused, satisfied.
It's like going to a restaurant and ordering a steak, but instead of food, the waiter brings you a piece of cardboard that has been heavily sprayed with artificial meat flavoring.
That's a very vivid image.
It might hit the right notes for about 2 seconds, but there's no actual nourishment there.
Yeah.
And this leads to a fascinating irony when you look at the actual data. The adaptations that are truly successful, the ones that feel full and satisfying like Heated Rivalry, aren't actually products of this fast fashion virality bug.
That is the ultimate paradox of the current system. The properties that actually resonate on screen, that have the depth to sustain multiple seasons of television, are often based on books that benefited from viral algorithmic discovery, but were actually written and published several years before the algorithm even existed.
Right.
They were written with care over an extended period of time without the looming pressure of trying to gain. They were discovered by the machine. They were not birthed by it.
So what does this all mean? It means the audience ultimately cannot be tricked in the long term. They might be drawn in by a viral trend, they might tune in for the premiere because of the hype. But if the foundation of the story isn't solid, if the characters are just cardboard cutouts mouthing trope-heavy dialogue, the adaptation will crumble under its own weight.
It always does.
Which begs a massive question. If the best, most sustainable stories aren't coming from authors trying to hack the TikTok algorithm, where is the purest, most successful source material actually coming from?
To answer that, we have to look away from traditional publishing entirely. We have to examine a category of writing that, while historically marginalized, currently dominates almost every medium and acts as the hidden foundation for some of the biggest financial successes in modern entertainment. We have to pull back the curtain on the secret engine of Hollywood. Fanfiction.
Fanfiction. It's a word that carries a lot of baggage, but it is undeniably the most powerful creative force. At its core, fan fiction is original writing that utilizes existing fictional characters, say from a popular movie or book series, or even real people like celebrities or musicians, and places them into new narratives constructed entirely by fans.
It is the ultimate sandbox. You are taking a world that someone else spent years building the mythology of a sci-fi universe, the interpersonal dynamics of a boy band, and you are playing in it to tell your own specific.
Yeah.
And while the mainstream perception often dismisses fan fiction as a very modern internet age novelty, the reality is that the practically historical and found.
Oh, absolutely. The instinct to take a familiar character and spin a new yarn is as old as language itself. But even looking at recent literary history, the roots go back centuries. There's a very strong academically sound argument to be made that William Shakespeare himself was essentially the most successful fan fiction author of all time.
It's a compelling lens through which to view the theatrical canon. Shakespeare rarely invented his plots out of whole cloth.
No, he didn't.
Many of his major works, Hamlet, Romeo, and Juliet, Macbeth, drew their narrative core from classic history's popular source material of his time or existing folklore. He was taking well-known stories, characters that his audience already recognized, and adapting them, expanding them, giving them his own psychological depth and poetic spin. The core mechanism of taking established lore and remixing it for a contemporary audience is exactly the same as modern fan fiction.
He was taking the existing IP of the 16th century and making it his own. But if we want to look at the launch of fanfiction as we understand it today as a distinct community-driven subculture, we have to look at the 1960s and the original Star Trek fan. I am obsessed with this era of history.
It's fascinating.
Long before the internet, fans were writing original stories about Kirk and Spock illustrating fan art, and they were literally sending these creations to each other through the physical mail.
It was a wildly labor-intensive grassroots effort. They were typing these stories out on typewriters, mimeographing them, stapling them together into underground zines, and distributing them through complex mailing lists or trading them in person at the very first sci-fi conventions.
Yeah.
It was a localized, highly dedicated gift economy.
Then the asteroid hits. The World Wide Web is introduced.
Yeah.
And suddenly, the physical distribution bottleneck completely evaporates. You no longer have to wait 4 weeks for a zine to arrive in the mail. The access becomes instantaneous and global. Websites and dedicated forums were constructed purely for people to write, share, and consume fan fiction.
Right.
And the crown jewel of this infrastructure, the platform that eventually became the pop line to Hollywood, is an archive known as AO3.
AO3, or the Archive of Our Own, is a monumental piece of internet architecture. It provided a centralized, highly searchable tag-based system for millions and it was from these digital archives that a direct pipeline to mainstream Hollywood dominance was forged. If you look at the most massive, world-conquering, billion-dollar franchise of the last decade, a shocking number of them share this exact origin story.
The ultimate patient zero for this phenomenon is, of course, the 50 Shades of Grey trilogy.
The cultural and financial impact of 50 Shades cannot be overstated, and its origins are purely fan. The series originated as fan fiction based on the Twilight universe.
Right.
The author took the established dynamic of the characters Edward and Bella, stripped away the supernatural vampire element, placed them in a contemporary corporate setting in Seattle, changed their names for legal publication, and proceeded to sell over 150 million copies worldwide.
150 million copies,
Bro.
which then spawned a blockbuster movie franchise that grossed over $1 billion.
Exactly.
It proved that the emotional resonance developed in the fanfiction AU and alternate universe could be monetized on an unprecedented scale.
Yeah.
And once that door was kicked open, it never closed. You have the after series. Those books and the subsequent string of movies were based entirely on fanfiction written about the band One Direction. And specifically, the central character was modeled after Harry Styles, which then leads to another massive recent hit, the movie The Idea of You, starring Anne Hathaway, which was also originally inspired by the persona of Harry Styles.
It's a phenomenon that really highlights the strange intersection of celebrity culture and modern storytelling.
Yeah.
You have a single pop star who is inadvertently serving as the foundational muse for multiple distinct Hollywood franchises.
The chokehold that Harry Styles has over the global entertainment industry is honestly staggering. He could probably orchestrate a coup if he really wanted to. But there is a quote from Robin Lee, the author of The Idea of You, that perfectly encapsulates exactly how these fan-driven stories germinate. It really peels back the curtain on the creative process.
Yes, her explanation of the book's genesis is incredibly illuminating. She recounted an evening back in 2017. Her husband was away on a business trip. She was up late surfing music videos and she stumbled across a video featuring a boy in a band she had never attention for. She described his face as being so aesthetically perfect, it took me by surprise. It was like art.
Which is a very relatable late-night internet spiral. She spends the next hour Googling him, trying to figure out who this kid is. During her deep dive, she discovers that he has a history of dating older women. And bam, the lightning strikes. As she says, the seed was planted.
Yeah.
That late-night YouTube spiral, sparked entirely by the visual aesthetic and public persona of a real-life celebrity, turns into a manuscript, which turns into a bestseller, which turns into a major motion picture.
It represents a total democratization of inspiration. You don't need a formal MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop to find the seed of a blockbuster story.
Not anymore.
You just need to be engaged with pop culture, understand human dynamics, and have the drive to sit down and write. The inspiration is literally just the public persona of a celebrity refracted through the lens of a writer's imagination.
Which brings us crashing back to our primary case study, because the most mind-bending revelation of this entire deep dive, the twist that ties all of these threads together, involves unmasking the hockey player. We have to look at Rachel Reed's journey on AO3.
This is the best part.
Because as you might have guessed by now, Heated Rivalry, the massive HBO Max hit about 2 rival professional hockey players. The show that broke Crave's streaming records is also based on fan fiction.
And not just any fanfic. It wasn't about real-life hockey players. The ultimate twist here is the specific, wildly unexpected origin. Heated Rivalry originated as Marvel Cinematic Universe fan. Specifically, it was a story centered around the characters of Steve Rogers, Captain America, and his best friend turned assassin Bucky Barnes.
The Stucky ship. For anyone unfamiliar with internet vernacular, a ship is short for relationship, and Stucky is the portmanteau for Steve and Bucky. This pairing had, and still has, an absolutely massive, passionate, creatively fertile following online. People saw the intense loyalty between those two characters in the Captain America films and ran with it.
But the mechanics of how a story about a super soldier from World War II and a brainwashed cyborg assassin transforms into a grounded contemporary romance about Canadian and Russian hockey players is a fascinating study in adaptation.
Yes.
It utilizes a highly specific genre of fan fiction known as the alternate universe, or the AU.
Okay, I love this part. So in 2016, the author Rachel Reed is drafting this hockey romance. At the time, she was under the mistaken impression that you couldn't post purely original fiction on AO3, that the platform was strictly for fan works.
Right.
So she takes her original concept for a sports romance and essentially backwards engineers it to fit the Marvel character.
She drafted an alternate universe where the canon of the Marvel movies does not exist, but the core personalities and physical traits of the character.
And the premise of this specific AAU is so incredibly specific and frankly hilarious when you think about what it eventually became. The original draft posted on AO3 featured Steve Rogers not as the shield-wielding Captain America, but as the superstar captain of the New York Rangers hockey team.
Right.
And he falls in love with Bucky Barnes, who is not the Winter Soldier, but is instead working as a barista at a smoothie shop in Manhattan.
It perfectly illustrates the flexibility and the appeal of the alternate universe format. You take the established dynamic, the existing chemistry, and the recognizable physical characteristics of two massive pop culture icons. You strip away all their canonical context, you remove the Avengers, the superpowers, the global stake, and you drop them into a completely mundane, recognizable romantic comedy scenario.
But why does that work? Why not just write original characters from the jump?
Because you are relying on the reader's pre-existing affection for those characters to do the emotional heavy lifting for you. The reader already cares deeply about Steve and Bucky. You don't have to spend 5 chapters convincing them to invest in the relationship. The emotional baseline is already set at maximum.
So the million-dollar question, how does a fan fiction about the captain of the Rangers and a Manhattan smoothie barista become a massive original, traditionally published book series and then a prestige HBO Max show? We have to examine the sheer mechanics of adapting fanfic for traditional publishing, which is a process known in the community as filing off the serial number.
Rachel Reed knew that this alternate universe story, while popular online, wasn't actually representative of the broader Game Changers hockey she wanted to write. She wanted it to be an original property. So by the end of 2016, she takes the story down from AO. She begins the arduous process of removing what she refers to as the Stucky element. She has to strip away all the Marvel identifiers, change the names, and reconstruct the narrative to stand on its own as original fiction. She then takes this newly scrubbed manuscript and submits it to traditional public.
But you can't just change the names using find and replace in a Word document and call it a day. The origins were still highly visible in the structure of the prose itself.
Oh, yeah.
6 months after she submits it, she gets a request for a revise and resubmit from an editor. And the feedback the publisher gives her is incredibly telling about the structural differences between these two mediums. The publisher tells her, it sounds a little fanficky.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that editorial note highlights a profound structural difference between how fan fiction is constructed versus how original fiction is constructed. Fan fiction writers, as a rule, describe far less about their characters' appearances and the physical world they inhabit. They don't have to do the heavy lifting of world building.
Exactly. Yeah. Because if you are writing a story centered around Steve Rogers, you don't have to spend 3 paragraphs describing his jawline, the exact shade of his blonde hair or his broad shoulders. Your reader has just spent a decade watching Chris Evans embody that role in 8 different blockbuster movies.
Right, it's already there.
The visual canon is permanently burned into their brain. The multi-billion-dollar world-building machine of Marvel Studios has already done the work for you. So as a fanfic writer, you skip all the exposition and dive straight into the good stuff, the character dynamics, the witty banter, the plot.
But when you remove those globally recognized names to publish it as an original piece of fiction, that lack of descriptive foundation suddenly becomes a massive structural flaw. To a traditional editor, it feels precisely because the scaffolding is entirely... You have 2 characters talking in a white room. Reed had to go back into the manuscript and painstakingly build the physical and contextual world that the Marvel Cinematic Universe had previously provided for her for free.
Yeah.
She had to teach the reader how to see these characters without relying on the ghost of...
And navigating this transition from fan creator to professional author brought up a lot of complicated, very real feelings for her. It's not just a clean jump to success. There's a phenomenon discussed here regarding creators' guilt.
This is so common.
Reed has gone on record saying she desperately wishes she had never posted that initial fanfiction draft. She knows that because nothing ever truly dies on the internet, those original files are still circulating out there somewhere, and she refers to her early draft as bad.
Yeah.
It's so embarrassing.
The embarrassment stems from a very specific creative compromise. She feels embarrassed because in her own retrospective view, she just rammed a bunch of extra Marvel characters into the story for no... She forced her completely original viable hockey romance to a Marvel mold simply because she wanted to fit the prevailing parameters of the AO3 platform at the time. But beyond the purely creative cringe, there is a much deeper sense of ethical guilt regarding the community.
Right, because Fandom operates on a gift economy.
Yeah.
She calls her own actions really bad fanfic author behavior. She talks about how all these people in the archive took the time to read her work. They left her lovely, encouraging feedback. They participated in this shared free communal experience.
Yeah.
And then she pulled the rug out from under them. She said she took it away just like a jerk to make money. That is a fascinating moral dilemma that so many modern creators face. It's the inherent tension between participating in a free communal exchange of passion-driven art and the very real practical desire to monetize your undeniable talent and build a career.
It's the friction between community and cap. Yet despite the guilt over removing the story and the embarrassment of draft, she remains incredibly clear-eyed about the reality. She openly acknowledges that her history with AO3 is exactly what got her to where today. That platform provided her with a public workshop, an immediate high-volume feedback, and the initial momentum required to hone her craft and build an audience.
And here is my absolute favorite detail of this entire pipe. Even after all the heavy revisions, even after she successfully filed off all the Marvel serial numbers, pleased the traditional publishers, and saw the story adapted for HBO, the lingering DNA of that original fanfiction is still visible if you know where to look. Hardcore fans who have followed the story from its inception have noticed that the character of Scott Hunter literally dresses exactly like Steve Rogers. The textual descriptions note that at certain points, Scott is wearing exactly the same articles of clothing that the Marvel character famously wears in the films. It is this wonderful, subtle little Easter egg for the original readers who know the true origins of the story.
It's a testament to how the initial spark of inspiration never truly fades. It goes to show while the names, the settings, and the legal copyright status might change the core aesthetic and the foundational emotional resonance that first sparked the author's imagination remain deeply embedded in the DNA of...
Absolutely.
It originated as a piece of derivative fanfic, but through craft and revision, it evolved into something that stands entirely on its own merit.
Which brings us perfectly to our final segment.
Yeah.
We have looked at the failures, the fast fashion algorithm-chasing adaptations that feel empty. And we have looked at this wildly successful, incredibly convoluted pipeline that goes from Marvel fan fiction to BookTok sensation to HBO Max hit.
Yeah.
So we need to distill this down. Exactly why did the heated Rivalry TV series succeed creatively and commercially where those empty BookTok tropes fail so miserably? What is the actual winning formula here?
The analysis we've been referencing provides a very clear defining contrast. The success of Heated Rivalry wasn't solely due to the fact that it had a built-in audience. A built-in audience can guarantee a strong premiere, but it cannot guarantee sustained viewership or critical acclaim.
Right.
The key differentiator was the execution. The adaptation worked so well because the creative team behind the camera really genuinely cared about the source material.
They weren't just executing a corporate mandate. They genuinely wanted to tell this specific story in their own specific vision. There was a very sharp contrast drawn here between a passionate creator-driven approach and a scenario where you have a huge studio involved calling the shots from a purely analytical standpoint.
That is the critical fault line in modern media. It is the difference between a cynical, spreadsheet-driven cash grab designed merely to exploit a passing viral trend and a piece of art that fundamentally respects its audience. When a massive studio is just checking demographic box and mitigate risks, saying, we need an enemies to lovers romance slate, you get the fast fashion. It feels hollow rush salt. But with Heated Rival, production was driven by cared about characters and the emotional arcs, and that level of passion trans directly to the
You can absolutely see the difference in the final product. The care comes through in every frame. It comes through in the way the show looks visually, in the specific atmosphere and tone they build, and crucial in the caliber of the act. It wasn't treated like a rushed lower-tier production line simply because it originated online. It was crafted as a pre-television.
Furthermore, it succeeded because it offered something genuinely fresh to the mainstream television. The story of Heated Rival, an intense, decade-long secret romance between two rival male acts in a hyper-masculine professional sports setting, is a narrative that we haven't really seen elevated to the line.
Very true.
It took a narrative framework that had previously been confined to niche online spaces or independent publishing, and it brought it onto a premium global platform with all the associated production value. And the argument here is that it is exactly those types of stories, the ones that operate outside the traditional legacy Hollywood mold, that deserve to be shared and funded more often.
And the really good news, the silver lining of this whole algorithmic upheaval, is that we're actually seeing these types of adaptations being greenlit more frequently.
Yeah.
Yes, BookTok is a double-edged sword. It absolutely causes a rise in fast fashion, algorithm-chasing empty books that clutter the market.
It does.
But at the exact same time, it is successfully bypassing the old gate. It is proving to studios that there is a massive paying audience for diverse, unique, highly specific stories that a traditional executive boardroom would have completely dismissed a decade ago.
It is a highly complex, often frustrating, but undeniably dynamic ecosystem. But the ultimate takeaway, the lesson that every studio executive should be writing on their whiteboard, is that passion is the only sustainable metric. The passion from the fans who organically elevate the story, combined with the passion of the creators back adapt, is the only formula that leads to success.
Exactly. I want to remind you, the listener, of this core truth as you navigate the endless ocean of content out there. Whether a story begins with a multi-million-dollar script deal in Los Angeles, or it begins with Captain America making smoothies in a fictional Manhattan coffee shop on a fan fiction forum, authenticity is the only key that matters.
Absolutely.
Creator passion and a genuine, unironic respect for the characters are the only things that truly capture an audience's heart and keep them coming back for more.
I couldn't agree more.
Which brings us to the end of this incredibly wild journey. Let's just take a breath and do a quick final summary of the pipeline we've just uncovered today, because it is staggering.
It really is.
We started by looking at how William Shakespeare was essentially doing narrative remixes of classic tales for the Globe Theater. We traced that exact same instinct through the 1960s, with Star Trek fans mailing stapled zines across the country. We watched that culture migrate to the internet, evolving, until a modern author decided to write a Marvel alternate universe story about a superhero and a smoothie shop barista on an archive called AO3.
Yeah.
We watched that author scrub the story of its Marvel DNA, get it published, watch it explode organically on BookTok, crash a Canadian streaming platform due to overwhelming global VPN demand, and finally transform into an absolute prestige television juggernaut on HBO Max. It is a stunning, beautiful evolution of how human beings tell, share, and consume stories in the digital age.
This raises an important question.
I knew you were going to say that. Lay it on us.
If we take all of these revelations to heart, if we accept the premise that Shakespeare's most enduring foundational plays were essentially 16th century fan fiction, and that today's biggest multi-million-dollar literary and television hits are quite literally repackaged fan fictions of comic book superheroes and British boy band singers, is the very concept of a wholly original story just a myth we tell ourselves better?
Wow.
Are we all, as a global culture from the 1500s to today, just continuously writing one massive, never-ending, constantly evolving piece of fan fiction about ourselves and the archetype?
That is exactly what I want to leave you with today. I want you to mull that over. Next time you hit play on your favorite streaming service or you pick up a best-selling novel, ask yourself, what is the true hidden origin of the story I'm about to consume? Who were these characters before they had these names? You might be very, very surprised by the answer. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the media you consume, and we will catch you on the next one.